In the locked darkness of a Montana barn in 1878, Elena Rowe lies crumpled on blood-soaked straw, her heartbeat fading. She's been left to die by the man who stole everything, her land, her name, her future. But through the splintered walls, she hears boots hitting dirt, hard, fast. A stranger named Caleb Hart kicks down the door with nothing but instinct and a worn pistol. What he finds inside will drag them both into a war neither expected, a fight for survival, justice, and a land worth more than either of them knows. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Montana sky had turned the color of old bruises by the time Caleb Hart heard the scream. He'd been mending fence line on the eastern edge of his property, the kind of work that didn't require much thinking, just calloused hands and patience. The wire was rusted, the posts leaning like drunk men, and he'd been at it since dawn. His horse, a gray mare named Ash, stood hip-shot nearby, flicking flies with her tail. The evening had settled into that particular quiet that comes before full dark. Birds gone silent, wind dropping to nothing, the world holding its breath. Then the scream cut through it all, not a yelp, not a shout, a scream that had terror in its bones. Caleb's hand stilled on the wire. He straightened, listening. Ash's ears swiveled forward, her nostrils flaring. The sound had come from the west, from the direction of the Thornton Ranch. Marcus Thornton's place, a spread that had grown considerably in the past year, swallowing up smaller properties like a man might swallow whiskey, quick and without remorse. Another scream, shorter this time, cut off. Caleb didn't think. Thinking was for lawyers and storekeepers. He grabbed Ash's reins, swung into the saddle, and kicked her into a gallop. The ride took less than 10 minutes, but it felt longer. His mind turned over possibilities, none of them good. Thornton ran his ranch with a crew of hard men, the kind who didn't ask questions and didn't flinch at ugly work. Caleb had avoided trouble with them by keeping to himself, working his own land, staying out of everyone's way. It was a policy that had served him well since he drifted into Montana 3 years ago with nothing but a bedroll and a past he didn't talk about. But there were some things a man couldn't ignore. The Thornton Ranch came into view as the last light bled from the sky. It was bigger than Caleb's place, more buildings, better fences. A main house sat at the center, 2 stories of timber and ambition. Beyond it, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and storage sheds. Lamplight glowed in a few windows, but the yard was empty. No movement, no sound. No. Caleb slowed Ash to a walk as they approached, his hand moving to the pistol on his hip. A Colt .45, 6 years old, reliable. He'd cleaned it that morning out of habit. Now he was glad for the habit. He dismounted near the barn, looping Ash's reins around a post. The barn doors were closed, but he could see a strip of light beneath them. He moved closer, boots quiet on the packed earth, and pressed his ear to the wood. Voices, low and tense. "Should have kept your mouth shut," a man was saying. "Should have signed the papers when you had the chance." "I won't sign anything." A woman's voice, strained but defiant. "You can't make me." A crack of sound, flesh on flesh. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Can I?" The man's voice was cold. "You got no family left, girl. No one's coming for you. You sign or you disappear. Simple as that." Caleb tried the barn door. Locked. He took a step back, measuring the wood, the hinges. Then he kicked it just below the latch. The door shuddered but held. He kicked again, harder, and this time the wood splintered. The third kick sent the door crashing inward. 3 men spun toward him. One held a lantern. Another had a woman by the arm, young, dark-haired, blood on her lip. The third man stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching. That one was Marcus Thornton. Caleb recognized him from town. Mid-40s, well-dressed even out here, with eyes like chips of flint. "The hell are you doing on my property, Hart?" Thornton's voice was level, but his hand had moved toward the gun at his belt. Caleb didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the woman. She was in her early 20s, he guessed, wearing a torn dress that might have been blue once. Her wrists were rope-burned, her face pale except for the blood and the bruise forming on her cheek. But her eyes were sharp and furious. "Let her go," Caleb said. Thornton smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "This is a private matter, family business." "She your family?" "Near enough. This is Elena Rowe. Her daddy owned the land next to mine. He died 2 weeks back. Hunting accident." The way Thornton said it made it clear he didn't believe in accidents. She's just finalizing the paperwork to sell me the property. Ain't that right, Elena? Elena said nothing. Her silence was louder than any protest. Let her go, Caleb repeated. The man holding Elena, a brute with a broken nose and scarred knuckles, tightened his grip. You want to walk away, mister? This ain't your concern. Caleb's hand stayed loose at his side, near the Colt. I'm making it my concern. Thornton's smile faded. You know what happens to men who stick their noses where they don't belong? I got an idea. Then you're dumber than you look. Thornton nodded. The brute shoved Elena aside. She stumbled, catching herself against a stall, and reached for his own gun. Caleb was faster. His Colt cleared leather and barked once, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The brute howled, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the dirt. The man with the lantern dropped it and bolted for the back of the barn. Thornton didn't move. He stood there, calculating, his hand still on his gun, but not drawing. You just made a mistake, Thornton said quietly. Won't be my first. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Thornton took his hand off his gun and stepped back, palms up. All right, you want her? Take her. She's nothing but trouble anyway. Caleb didn't trust it, but he wasn't about to argue. He moved toward Elena, keeping his gun on Thornton and the wounded man. Can you walk? She nodded, pushing herself upright. Her legs shook, but she stayed on her feet. Then let's go. They backed toward the barn door. Thornton watched them, that faint smile creeping back onto his face. This isn't over, Hart. You understand that? Caleb didn't answer. He grabbed Ash's reins and helped Elena into the saddle. She swayed but held on. He swung up behind her, kicked Ash into a gallop, and they tore out of the yard into the gathering dark. They rode hard for a mile before Caleb slowed the mare. Elena hadn't said a word, but he could feel her trembling. Whether from cold, fear, or rage, he couldn't tell. Maybe all three. You hurt? He asked. I'll live. Her voice was hoarse. Good enough. He steered Ash towards his own land, a modest spread he'd carved out of scrub and stubbornness. The house was small, one room really, with a loft for sleeping, but it had a stove, a decent roof, and walls that kept the wind out. He'd built it himself, same as the barn and the chicken coop. It wasn't much, but it was his. He helped Elena down and led Ash into the barn. She followed him inside, moving carefully, like her ribs hurt. He unsaddled the mare, rubbed her down, and gave her grain. Elena stood in the doorway, watching. Why'd you do that? She asked finally. Caleb glanced at her. Do what? Come after me. You don't know me. He shrugged. Heard you scream. And that was enough? It was enough. She studied him for a moment, then looked away. My father's dead. Thornton killed him. I know he did, even if no one can prove it. He's been trying to take our land for months. Offered to buy it, then offered again with threats attached. My father refused. Then one day he went hunting and didn't come back. They found him at the bottom of a ravine, said he fell. But you don't think so. My father knew those trails better than anyone. He didn't fall. Her voice cracked, just slightly, then steadied. Thornton's been after me ever since. Forged documents saying my father owed him money, claims I have to sell to settle the debt. That legal? It is if the judge is in his pocket. Caleb finished with Ash and straightened. So what were you doing in his barn? Trying to find proof. I broke in after dark, thought I could get into his office, but his men caught me. She touched her split lip gingerly. They were going to kill me, make it look like an accident, same as my father. And you still went in there alone. I didn't have anyone else. Caleb looked at her, really looked. She was young, but there was steel in her, the kind of steel that didn't bend easy. He recognized it because he'd seen it in himself once, a long time ago. Well, he said, you got someone now. Imak. Inside the house, Caleb lit a lamp and stoked the stove. Elena sat at the small table, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. He heated water and brought her a tin cup. It's not much, he said, but it's clean. She took it, sipping slowly. Thank you. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. You got any family? Anyone who can help? She shook her head. Just my father. My mother died when I was young. No siblings. No cousins that I know of. Friends? A few in town, But Thornton owns half of them, and the other half are too scared to cross him. Caleb leaned back, thinking. What's on your land that he wants so bad? I don't know. It's not the best grazing. The soil's rocky. There's water, but nothing special. She frowned. My father used to say there was something, though. He'd go out riding alone sometimes, come back looking pleased with himself, but he never told me what it was. You think Thornton knows? I think he knows something I don't. Caleb nodded slowly. Then we need to find out what it is. Elena looked up sharply. We. You can't go back to your place. Thornton's men will be watching, and you can't stay in town. You need somewhere safe while we figure this out. And you're offering? I'm offering. She searched his face, looking for the catch. Caleb kept his expression neutral. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even particularly good. But he'd learned a long time ago that the world had enough men willing to look the other way. He didn't need to be one of them. Finally, Elena nodded. All right, but I'm not hiding. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We find proof, we take it to the law, and we make Thornton pay. The law's in his pocket, remember? Not all of it. There's a federal marshal in Helena. If we can get evidence to him, Thornton won't be able to bury it. Caleb considered that. Helena was a 3-day ride, but it was an option. First things first. We need to know what we're dealing with. That means going back to your land. Thornton's men will be there. Then we go at night, quiet, in and out. Elena smiled faintly. You're either brave or crazy. Little of both, probably. She laughed, a short, surprised sound, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Caleb stood and moved to the stove, pulling out a pan. You eaten? Not since morning. Then sit tight. I'll make us something. He fried up beans and salt pork, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs without pretending to be fancy. Elena ate like she'd forgotten what food tasted like, and Caleb didn't blame her. He'd been hungry enough times to know that fear killed appetite until the body started shutting down. Then hunger came back all at once. When they finished, he gave her the loft and took the floor by the stove. She protested, but he waved her off. You need the rest more than I do. We'll head out tomorrow night. She climbed the ladder slowly, favoring her ribs, and disappeared into the loft. Caleb lay on his bedroll, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. He thought about Thornton, about the men he employed, about the way violence had a habit of spreading once it started. He thought about Elena, too, the way she'd stood in that barn, defiant even with blood on her face. The way she'd looked at him like she was trying to decide if he was another problem or the start of a solution. Mostly, he thought about the fact that he'd just painted a target on his own back, and there wasn't much he could do about it now except see it through. Sleep came eventually, thin and restless. The next day crawled by. Caleb kept busy with chores, feeding the animals, mending harness, checking the fence line he'd abandoned the night before. Elena helped where she could, though he could see the pain in her movements. She didn't complain, just worked, silent and stubborn. By mid-afternoon, he'd saddled Ash and ridden into town for supplies. He needed ammunition, coffee, and a few other things. More than that, he needed to hear what people were saying. The general store was run by a man named Peterson, a Swede with a thick accent and a knack for minding his own business. Caleb bought what he needed, paid in cash, and lingered near the counter. You hear anything about the rogue girl? He asked casually. Peterson glanced up, his expression careful. Heard she's missing. Thornton's got men out looking for her. Says she ran off, maybe hurt herself. That what people believe? People believe what's safest to believe. Caleb nodded. And you? Peterson wrapped the supplies in brown paper, his hands slow and deliberate. I believe Thornton's a dangerous man. I believe the rogue girl's father didn't fall off no cliff. And I believe you should watch your back, Mr. Hart. Appreciate the advice. Caleb left the store and rode home, the supplies tied behind his saddle. The town had felt wrong, too quiet, too many eyes watching. Thornton's reach was longer than he'd thought. When he got back, Elena was sitting on the porch, cleaning his rifle. She looked up as he dismounted. Figured you wouldn't mind, she said, nodding at the rifle. Long as you know how to use it. My father taught me. Caleb carried the supplies inside and came back out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat on the steps. The sun was starting to sink, painting the hills gold and red. The town's talking, he said. Thornton's got a story ready. Says you ran off, maybe had an accident. Elena's jaw tightened. Of course he does. We need to move fast. Once he realizes you're not dead, he'll come looking. Then we go tonight. That's the plan. They sat in silence, drinking coffee, watching the light fade. Caleb found himself wondering what Elena's life had been like before all this. Whether she'd been happy, whether she'd had dreams that didn't involve fighting for survival. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. He looked at her. I know. Then why? Caleb thought about that. He could have given her a dozen answers, because it was the right thing, because Thornton needed stopping, because he didn't like bullies. All of them were true, but the real answer was simpler. Because I can, he said, and that's reason enough. Elena nodded slowly. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. They left just after midnight, when the moon was high and the air had turned cold. Caleb saddled Ash and a second horse, a bay gelding he kept for packing. Elena wore one of his old shirts and a pair of trousers cinched with rope. She looked like a boy in the dark, which was the point. They rode slow and quiet, sticking to the tree line, avoiding the main trails. The Rowe Ranch sat about 5 miles east, nestled in a valley between two ridges. It wasn't big, maybe 100 acres of grazing land, a small house, a barn, a few outbuildings, but it was decent land, well watered, with good grass. As they approached, Caleb reined in and dismounted. Elena did the same. They tied the horses in a grove of cottonwoods and moved forward on foot. The ranch was dark except for a single lamp burning in the barn. Caleb could make out 2 figures near the corral, Thornton's men, standing guard. He motioned for Elena to stay low, and they crept closer, using the shadows. How many men you think he's got here? Caleb whispered. 2 in the barn. Maybe more in the house. What are we looking for? My father's office. It's in the house, 2nd floor. He kept records, maps, correspondence. If there's proof of what Thornton's after, it'll be there. Caleb studied the house. 2 stories, wood frame, dark windows. Getting in wouldn't be easy. Getting out would be harder. All right, he said, I'll keep the guards busy. You get inside, find what you need, and get out. I'll meet you back at the horses. Elena grabbed his arm. That's a terrible plan. You got a better one? She opened her mouth, then closed it. No. Then let's go. Caleb circled around to the far side of the barn, keeping low. When he was in position, he picked up a rock and hurled it at the barn door. It hit with a loud crack. The guards turned, voices rising. What was that? Go check. One of them moved toward the barn. The other stayed by the corral, his rifle ready. Caleb waited until the first guard disappeared inside, then stepped out of the shadows. Evening, he said. The second guard spun, bringing the rifle up. Caleb lunged, grabbing the barrel and twisting. The guard pulled the trigger, but the shot went wide. Caleb slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, and the guard dropped like a sack of grain. The first guard came running out of the barn. Caleb drew his Colt and fired a shot into the dirt at the man's feet. Don't, Caleb said. The guard froze. Drop the rifle. Slow. The man obeyed, his hands shaking. Caleb gestured toward the barn. Inside, move. The guard stumbled into the barn. Caleb followed, keeping the Colt trained on him. Once inside, he grabbed a length of rope from a hook and tied the man's wrists behind his back. Your friend's going to wake up soon, Caleb said. When he does, tell him to stay put. You try anything stupid, and I'll make sure Thornton hears how easy you made this. The guard nodded, his face pale. Caleb left him there and jogged toward the house. Elena was already inside. He could see her silhouette moving past a second-floor window. He positioned himself near the back door, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. Then a light flared in the upstairs window. A match. Elena was searching. Caleb's pulse quickened. Too much time. They needed to move. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast. He swore under his breath and ran to the corner of the house. 4 riders were coming up the road, torches in hand. Thornton's men. Someone must have sent word. Caleb whistled, a low, sharp sound. Elena's head appeared in the window. He gestured urgently. She nodded and disappeared. The riders were close now, maybe 50 yards out. Caleb moved to the front of the house, his Colt ready. The door opened and Elena slipped out, clutching a leather satchel. Got it? Caleb asked. Got it. They ran. The riders saw them and shouted. Gunfire cracked, bullets kicking up dirt. Caleb and Elena sprinted for the trees, weaving, keeping low. Ash and the bay were right where they'd left them. Caleb boosted Elena into the saddle and vaulted onto Ash. They rode hard, branches whipping past, the ground uneven and treacherous in the dark. Behind them, the riders gave chase, their torches bobbing like angry fireflies. Caleb leaned low over Ash's neck, urging her on. The mare was fast, but the bay was struggling to keep up. Elena clung to the saddle, the satchel pressed against her chest. A shot rang out, closer this time. Caleb risked a glance back. The riders were gaining. There, Elena pointed ahead. A narrow ravine cut across their path, maybe 6 feet wide. Caleb didn't hesitate. He kicked Ash into a full gallop and she launched over the gap, landing hard on the other side. The bay followed, stumbling but staying upright. The riders pulled up short, their horses balking at the jump. Caleb and Elena didn't wait to see what they'd do next. They kept riding, putting distance between them and the pursuit, until the torches were just pinpricks in the distance and then nothing at all. They slowed finally, the horses blowing hard. Caleb's heart was hammering, his hands slick on the reins. Elena was breathing fast, her face flushed. That, she said, was too close. Caleb let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, it was. She held up the satchel, but I got it. Then let's see if it was worth it. They didn't stop until they reached Caleb's property, and even then he kept Ash moving at a steady trot until the barn was in sight. Dawn was still an hour off, the sky that deep shade of blue that comes just before the world remembers color. Elena slid off the bay first, her legs nearly buckling when her boots hit the ground. Caleb caught her elbow. I'm fine, she said, but her voice was thin. Sure you are. He led the horses into the barn and stripped the tack while Elena sagged against a post, the leather satchel clutched tight. Her hands were shaking. Not fear this time, exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones after you've been running on nothing but nerves for too long. Caleb fetched water for the horses and made sure they had hay, then turned to Elena. Inside. You need to sit down before you fall down. She didn't argue. In the house, he lit the stove and put coffee on. Elena dropped into a chair and set the satchel on the table like it might explode. For a moment, she just stared at it. You gonna open it? Caleb asked. I don't know what I'm hoping to find, she said quietly. Part of me wants proof. The other part is scared of what that proof might mean. Only one way to know. She nodded and unbuckled the straps. The satchel was old, the leather cracked and stained. Inside were papers, dozens of them, some folded, some loose, some bound with string. Elena spread them across the table, her fingers moving quickly, sorting. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. He didn't push, just waited. Here, she said finally, pulling out a map. It was hand-drawn, the lines careful and precise. Her father's work, probably. It showed the row property in detail, boundaries, water sources, elevation markers. But there was something else. A section near the northeast corner had been circled in red ink, with notes scrawled in the margin. Elena leaned closer, reading. Vein runs 40 feet, high grade, say confirms. What does that mean? Caleb took the map, studying it. Sounds like a mining claim. Your father found something, ore maybe, silver or copper. There's no mine on our land. Not yet. But if the vein's there, someone could dig one. He set the map down. That's what Thornton's after, not the land. What's under it? Elena sat back, her face pale. My father never said anything. Maybe he didn't want to put a target on you, or maybe he was waiting until he had the claim filed proper. Caleb shuffled through the other papers. These look like assay reports. Someone tested the ore. Results came back good. Good enough to kill for. Looks that way. Elena's hands clenched into fists. Thornton knew. He must have. That's why he wanted my father gone. Why he tried to force me to sell. And now he knows you're alive and you've got the proof. Caleb met her eyes. He won't stop. Not until he gets what he wants, or you're dead. She didn't flinch. Then we take this to the marshal in Helena. Like I said, that's a long ride, 3 days, maybe more. Thornton's men will be looking for us. So we leave now, today. Caleb shook his head. The horses need rest. So do you. We push them too hard, and we'll end up stranded halfway there. Then what do you suggest? We rest today. Hide the evidence somewhere safe. Then we leave tomorrow at first light. Take the back trails. Stay off the main roads. He paused. And we don't come back until Thornton's behind bars or 6 feet under. Elena studied him for a long moment. You really think we can do this? I think we don't have much choice. She nodded slowly, then picked up the map again, tracing the red circle with her finger. My father spent weeks out there. I thought he was just checking cattle, but he was surveying, planning. Her voice cracked, just barely. He was trying to build something for us, a future. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just drank his coffee and let her sit with it. After a while, Elena gathered the papers and tucked them back into the satchel. Where should we hide this? Somewhere Thornton won't think to look. Caleb stood and walked to the corner of the room, where a loose floorboard creaked underfoot. He pried it up, revealing a shallow space beneath. Not fancy, but it'll do for now. Elena handed him the satchel. He placed it in the hollow and replaced the board, then dragged a rug over the spot. Get some sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I'll manage. She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She climbed the ladder to the loft and disappeared. Within minutes, Caleb heard her breathing even out. He sat by the window, rifle across his lap, and watched the sun come up. The day passed in uneasy silence. Caleb checked the perimeter twice, looking for signs of riders or tracks. Found nothing. Either Thornton's men hadn't figured out where Elena had gone, or they were biding their time. Neither option made him feel better. Elena slept until noon, then came down looking stiff but steadier. She helped him check the horses, mend a broken hinge on the chicken coop, and prepare supplies for the trip. They worked without talking much. It wasn't awkward, just focused. By late afternoon, Caleb had packed saddlebags with jerky, hardtack, coffee, and ammunition. He'd filled canteens, rolled blankets, and made sure the rifles were clean. Elena watched him work, her expression unreadable. You've done this before, she said. Done what? Run. Packed up and disappeared. Caleb didn't answer right away. He tightened a strap on one of the saddlebags, then sat back on his heels. Once or twice. What were you running from? He met her eyes. Does it matter? Maybe. He stood, brushing dirt off his hands. I was a different man back then. Made mistakes. Hurt people I shouldn't have. Came out here to leave that behind. Did it work? Mostly. He paused. Until yesterday. Elena tilted her head. You regret helping me? No. Then why say it like that? Because once you step into a fight, you can't step back out. Not cleanly. He picked up the saddlebags and slung them over his shoulder. I knew that when I kicked down Thornton's barn door. Did it anyway. Why? Already told you. Tell me again. Caleb set the bags down and looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't backing down. Wasn't letting him off easy. Because I've walked past too many people who needed help, he said quietly. Told myself it wasn't my problem. Told myself I'd done enough bad in my life that I didn't owe the world anything good. And maybe that's true. But hearing you scream, he stopped, shook his head. I couldn't walk past that. Elena didn't say anything for a moment, then softly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. I know, but still. They finished packing as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Caleb made a simple meal, beans, cornbread, coffee, and they ate in silence. When they were done, Elena cleared the plates and stood by the stove, staring at the fire. I keep thinking about my father, she said. How alone he must have felt at the end. If Thornton's men pushed him off that cliff, he would have known why. Would have known they were taking everything from him. She turned to Caleb. I don't want to die like that. Helpless. You won't. How can you be sure? Because you're not helpless. You proved that when you broke into Thornton's ranch looking for proof. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, and I'm still not sure which. She laughed, sharp and unexpected. Probably both. Probably. The moment stretched, then Elena crossed her arms. What happens if we make it to Helena and the marshal doesn't believe us? Then we find someone who will. And if no one does? Caleb stood, walking to the window. Outside, the last light was bleeding from the sky. Then we figure out another way. But we don't quit. Not while we're breathing. Elena came to stand beside him. You sound like my father. He a stubborn man. The worst? Then I'll take that as a compliment. They stood there, side by side, watching the darkness settle. After a while, Elena spoke again. What will you do? After this is over? Haven't thought that far ahead. Liar. Caleb smiled faintly. All right, I figure I'll come back here, fix up the place, run cattle, same as before. Alone? He glanced at her. That bother you? No, just seems like a waste. Of what? Of someone willing to kick down doors for strangers. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he changed the subject. We should get some rest. Long ride tomorrow. Elena nodded, but didn't move. Caleb? Yeah? If something happens to me, it won't. But if it does, I want you to take the satchel to Helena anyway. Make sure Thornton doesn't get away with this. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me. He turned to face her fully. I promise. But you need to promise me something too. What? That you'll stop talking like you're already dead. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Deal. They slept in shifts that night. Caleb took the first watch, sitting by the window with the rifle across his knees. The hours dragged. Every sound, wind in the eaves, a coyote yipping in the distance, the creak of settling wood, put him on edge. But nothing came. When Elena took over at midnight, Caleb lay down by the stove and tried to sleep. It came in fits and starts, his mind churning through plans and contingencies. What if Thornton's men were waiting on the trail? What if the marshal in Helena was bought off too? What if they didn't make it at all? He woke before dawn to find Elena still awake, her eyes red-rimmed. You were supposed to wake me, he said. Couldn't sleep anyway. They gathered their things in silence, working by lamplight. Caleb saddled the horses while Elena checked the satchel one last time, then tucked it into her saddlebag. By the time the sky started to lighten, they were ready. Caleb took one last look at the house. It wasn't much, but it had been his, a place where the past couldn't follow. Now he was riding straight back into the kind of trouble he'd spent 3 years avoiding. You all right? Elena asked. Yeah. He swung into the saddle. Let's go! They rode north, skirting the main road and sticking to game trails that wound through the hills. The land here was rough, pine forests, rocky outcrops, steep climbs that left the horses blowing hard, but it was also empty. No sign of riders, no dust on the horizon. By midday, they'd covered maybe 15 miles. Caleb called a halt near a creek to water the horses and rest. Elena dismounted stiffly, rubbing her lower back. How far to Helena? She asked. At this pace? 2.5 days, maybe 3? And you think we can stay ahead of Thornton's men that long? If we're lucky. And if we're not? Caleb checked the loads in his rifle. Then we fight. Elena crouched by the creek, splashing water on her face. You ever killed a man, Caleb? The question hung in the air. Caleb set the rifle down. Yes. In the war? And after? She looked up at him. Does it bother you? Sometimes. He sat on a rock, his gaze distant. Depends on the man. Depends on the reason. What if we have to kill Thornton's men? What if there's no other way? Then we do what we have to. But I'm not looking for a fight, Elena. I've had enough of those to last a lifetime. She nodded and stood, brushing dirt from her trousers. I don't want to kill anyone either, but I won't let them take me. Not again. Fair enough. They mounted up and kept moving. The trail climbed higher, the air thinning, the trees giving way to scrub and rock. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and looked down into a narrow valley. A thin column of smoke rose from the far side. Caleb reined in. Someone's camped down there. Thornton's men? Could be. Or it could be travelers. He studied the smoke. Either way, we need to know. So we go around? Not enough cover. If we circle, we'll be exposed for miles. He thought for a moment. We go down, quiet. See what we're dealing with. They descended slowly, keeping to the shadows, the horses' hooves muffled on the soft earth. As they got closer, Caleb could make out 3 men around a fire. They weren't Thornton's crew. At least, not any he recognized. Rough-looking types, though. Drifters, maybe, or worse. One of them spotted Caleb and Elena and stood, his hand moving to his belt. That's close enough. Caleb raised a hand, keeping it away from his gun. Just passing through. Saw your fire. The man looked them over. You alone? Just the two of us. Another man stood, younger, with a scar running down his cheek. Where are you headed? North, Caleb said, vague but not suspicious. The third man, older and heavier, stayed seated. You running from something? Nope, just riding. The older man grunted. Funny time to be just riding. Heard there's trouble brewing around these parts. Some rancher got himself killed. His daughter's missing. Elena tensed. Caleb kept his expression neutral. That's so. That's what they're saying in town. Fellow named Thornton's offering a reward for her. Says she's dangerous, might have killed her own father. Caleb's hand drifted closer to his Colt. Sounds like a tall tale. Maybe. The older man's eyes shifted to Elena. You look familiar, girl. I get that a lot. The younger man with the scar stepped closer. How much was that reward again, Charlie? $100, the older man said. Dead or alive. Caleb's pulse quickened. We're not interested in your reward, we're moving on. I don't think so. The younger man drew a revolver. I think you're going to sit tight while we... Caleb kicked Ash forward. The mare barreled into the younger man, knocking him sprawling. His gun went off, the shot wild. Caleb drew his Colt and fired at the first man, catching him in the shoulder. The man dropped, cursing. Elena spurred the bay and bolted past the fire. The older man lunged for her reins, but missed. Caleb fired again, this time into the dirt near the older man's feet. Stay down, Caleb barked. The older man froze, his hands up. Caleb backed Ash away, keeping his gun trained on the camp. The younger man was scrambling for his revolver. Caleb shot it out of his hand. Next one goes through your chest, Caleb said. The younger man paled and went still. Caleb turned Ash and galloped after Elena. She was already 100 yards ahead, riding hard. He caught up, and they kept going, putting distance between themselves and the camp. Behind them, angry shouts faded into nothing. They didn't slow until the valley was miles behind them. When they finally stopped, both of them were breathing hard. They know, Elena said. Thornton's spreading the word, offering money. Yeah. We can't trust anyone. No, we can't. Elena looked at him, her face pale. This is going to get worse, isn't it? Probably. And you're still willing to help me? Caleb holstered his Colt. I told you, I'm in this. Even if it gets you killed? Even then, she shook her head. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool. Could be both. Despite everything, Elena smiled. Yeah, could be. They rode until dusk, then made camp in a dense stand of pines. No fire, no light. They ate cold jerky and drank water from the canteens, then took turns keeping watch. Caleb lay on his bedroll, staring up at the branches overhead. The stars were out, sharp and cold. He thought about the men in the valley, about the reward, about how fast word traveled when money was involved. Thornton was smart. He'd turned Elena into prey, and every drifter and bounty hunter in the territory would be looking for her. Caleb? Elena's voice was quiet. Yeah? What if we don't make it? We will. But what if we don't? What if Thornton wins? Caleb turned his head to look at her. She was sitting against a tree, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them. She looked young, scared, human. Then he wins, Caleb said. But we won't make it easy for him. That's not much of a plan. It's the only one I've got. Elena rested her chin on her knees. My father used to say that some fights are worth losing, that sometimes you stand up because it's the right thing, even if you know you'll fall. Your father sounds like a good man. He was. Her voice broke, just a little. And Thornton took him from me. Caleb sat up. Then we make sure Thornton pays for it. All of it. Elena looked at him, her eyes wet but fierce. Promise me something else. What? If it comes down to me or the evidence, you save the evidence. You make sure the truth gets out. I already promised I'd get you to Helena. That's not what I'm asking. Caleb shook his head. I'm not leaving you behind. Caleb, no. His voice was firm. We do this together or not at all. Understand? She stared at him, then nodded slowly. All right. All right. They sat in silence after that, the night settling around them. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Caleb listened to the sound, letting it ground him. He'd made a lot of promises in his life, broken more than a few. But this one he intended to keep. When it was his turn to sleep, he closed his eyes and tried not to think about the road ahead, about the men hunting them, about the odds stacked against them. Instead, he thought about Elena, about the way she'd faced down Thornton's men with blood on her face, about the way she'd refused to break, even when everything was falling apart. She was stronger than she knew, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The next day started cold. Frost clung to the grass, and their breath misted in the air. They broke camp quickly and kept moving, pushing the horses hard. The land here was wild, steep ridges, narrow canyons, places where a wrong step could send you tumbling. But it also meant cover, lots of it. By midday, they'd crossed into rougher territory. The trails were barely trails at all, just deer paths that wound through the rocks. Caleb navigated by instinct, keeping the sun at their backs, heading north and west. Elena rode in silence, her face set. She hadn't said much since last night, and Caleb didn't push. Everyone had their own way of dealing with fear. Hers seemed to be shutting down, focusing, putting one foot in front of the other. They stopped to rest near a shallow stream. Caleb filled the canteens while Elena checked the horses. Ash had a stone in her hoof. Elena pried it out carefully, murmuring to the mare. "You're good with them," Caleb said. "My father taught me. Said a horse would get you through hard times if you treated her right." He was right. Elena set Ash's hoof down and straightened. "How much farther?" "Another day and a half, maybe less if we push through the night." "Can the horses handle it?" "They'll have to." Elena nodded. She looked tired. They both were. But stopping wasn't an option. They mounted up and kept going. The sun climbed, then started its descent. Shadows grew long, and then, just as the light was fading, Caleb saw it. Dust on the horizon. Riders. 3, maybe 4. "We've got company," he said. Elena followed his gaze. "Thornton's men? Who else? How far?" "Mile. Maybe less." Elena's jaw tightened. "Can we outrun them?" Caleb looked at the terrain. They were in open ground, nowhere to hide. The riders would see them for sure. "Not out here. We need to find cover." "Where?" Caleb scanned the landscape. To the east, a line of cliffs. To the west, nothing but scrub. North, more open ground. South. "There," he said, pointing. A dry riverbed cut through the land, deep enough to hide in. "We get down there, we can hold them off. Or get trapped." "You have a better idea?" Elena didn't. They spurred the horses and rode hard for the riverbed, the dust cloud behind them growing closer. Caleb's heart hammered, too close. They weren't going to make it. But they did. Barely. They slid down into the riverbed just as the riders crested a rise. Caleb dismounted and grabbed his rifle. Elena did the same. "Stay low," Caleb said. "Don't shoot unless you have to." "And if I have to?" "Then make it count." They crouched behind a fallen log, rifles ready. The riders slowed, searching. 4 of them. Armed, dangerous. One of them pointed toward the riverbed. They started moving closer. Caleb aimed his rifle, his finger resting on the trigger. Beside him, Elena's breathing was quick and shallow. "Steady," he murmured. The riders were 50 yards out, 40, 30. One of them called out, "We know you're down there. Come out and nobody gets hurt." Caleb didn't answer. 20 yards. "Last chance," Caleb fired. The shot hit the lead rider's horse, and the animal reared, throwing its rider. Chaos erupted. The other riders scattered, returning fire. Bullets kicked up dirt and splintered wood. Elena fired, her shot going wide. She cursed and chambered another round. Caleb fired again, catching one of the riders in the leg. The man screamed and fell from his saddle. The remaining 2 riders took cover behind rocks, still shooting. Caleb ducked as a bullet whizzed past his head. "We can't stay here," Elena shouted. "I know." Caleb looked around. There, a narrow gap in the riverbed, leading into a canyon. "Go! I'll cover you." "What about you?" "I'm right behind you. Go!" Elena hesitated, then grabbed the horses and ran. Caleb laid down covering fire, forcing the riders to keep their heads down. Then he turned and sprinted after Elena. They plunged into the canyon, the walls rising steep on either side. It was narrow, barely wide enough for the horses. Behind them, the riders shouted and gave chase. The canyon twisted and turned, the ground uneven. Caleb's lungs burned. Elena was ahead, moving fast, the horses right behind her. Then the canyon opened into a small clearing and dead-ended into a sheer rock wall. Elena spun, her eyes wide. "We're trapped!" Caleb looked up. The wall was maybe 20 feet high, climbable. Maybe. "Can you climb?" he asked. "I don't know." "Try." Elena grabbed a handhold and started up. Caleb turned, rifle ready. The riders were coming. He could hear their boots on the stone. He fired into the canyon mouth, once, twice. The sound echoed, deafening. The riders returned fire, forcing him to duck. Bullets ricocheted off the walls. "Caleb!" Elena called. She was halfway up the wall. "Keep going!" One of the riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Caleb shot him. The man dropped. Another rider came around the corner. Caleb pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. He dropped the rifle and drew his Colt. 2 shots left. The rider raised his gun. Caleb fired first. The rider staggered and fell. Above, Elena reached the top of the wall. "Caleb, come on!" He holstered the Colt and started climbing. His hands found holds, his boots scrabbling for purchase. Halfway up, a shot rang out. Pain flared in his side. He gasped, nearly lost his grip, but forced himself to keep moving. 1 hand, 1 foot. Again. Elena grabbed his arm and hauled him over the edge. They collapsed on the ground, breathing hard. "You're hit," Elena said, her voice shaking. Caleb pressed a hand to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "It's not bad." "You're bleeding." "I've had worse." Below, the riders were regrouping. Caleb forced himself to his feet. "We need to move." They stumbled away from the edge, the horses following. Caleb's side burned, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They walked for an hour, maybe more. Finally, Caleb's legs gave out. He sank to the ground, his vision swimming. Elena knelt beside him. "Let me see." He lifted his hand. The wound was a graze, not deep, but it was bleeding freely. Elena tore a strip from her shirt and pressed it against the wound. "Hold this," she said. Caleb obeyed, his head spinning. Elena worked quickly, wrapping the makeshift bandage tight. "That'll have to do for now," she said. "Can you ride?" "Yeah." "Liar." "I'll manage." She helped him to his feet and into the saddle. He clung to the horn, gritting his teeth. They rode through the night, slow and careful. Caleb drifted in and out, his body protesting every jolt. But Elena kept them moving, kept them alive. By dawn, they'd put miles between themselves and the canyon. Caleb's fever had started, his skin clammy, his breath shallow. Elena found a sheltered spot and helped him down. "Rest," she said. "I'll keep watch." Caleb wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. When Caleb woke, the sun was high and merciless. His mouth tasted like dirt and copper, and his side felt like someone had jammed a hot poker between his ribs. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Don't move!" Elena's voice came from somewhere to his left. "You'll tear the stitches." "Stitches?" His voice came out as a croak. She appeared in his line of vision, her face smudged with dirt and exhaustion. "I sewed you up while you were out. Wasn't pretty, but it'll hold if you don't do anything stupid." "Where'd you learn that?" "My father. He said a rancher needed to know how to patch up livestock and people." She held up a canteen. "Drink." He did, the water cool and perfect. When he'd had enough, she pulled it away and sat back on her heels. They were in a shallow depression surrounded by rocks, the horses tethered nearby. The sky was clear, no sign of dust or riders. "How long was I out?" Caleb asked. "Most of the night and half the morning. Your fever broke about an hour ago." He looked down at his side. His shirt was gone, replaced by strips of cloth wrapped tight. The bandage was already stained dark. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. The bullet grazed your ribs but didn't go deep. You bled a lot, though, lost too much." She crossed her arms. "You're lucky you didn't bleed out." "Lucky," Caleb repeated. "That what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" "Stubborn." Elena almost smiled. Almost. "Yeah, that fits too." Caleb shifted, testing his limits. The pain was sharp, but manageable. He'd had worse. "We need to keep moving." "You're in no shape to ride. Don't have much choice. Those men are still out there." "I know, I've been watching. Haven't seen anything yet. But that doesn't mean they're gone. She stood and walked to the edge of their camp, scanning the horizon. We're maybe a day from Helena, if you can stay in the saddle. I can. You sure about that? Caleb pushed himself upright, gritting his teeth against the pain. His vision swam, but he stayed conscious. That was something. I'll manage. Elena turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. You keep saying that, but you can't keep bleeding and fighting and riding like nothing's wrong. What else am I supposed to do? Rest. Let me handle this. Handle what? You plan on riding to Helena alone? If I have to. Caleb shook his head. Not happening. Caleb, I said no. His voice was firmer than he felt. We do this together. That was the deal. Elena's jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she'd argue, but instead she just looked away. Fine. But if you fall off that horse, I'm leaving you behind. Fair enough. She helped him to his feet, and he swayed but stayed upright. The world tilted, then righted itself. Elena grabbed his arm, steadying him. You're a terrible liar, she said. Takes one to know one. They stood there for a moment, close enough that Caleb could see the worry in her eyes. She was scared. Not for herself. For him. The realization hit him harder than he expected. I'm not dying today, he said quietly. You better not. I didn't waste good thread on you just to watch you keel over. Yes, ma'am. Elena let go of his arm and stepped back, her expression shifting back to something harder. We leave in 10 minutes. Eat something first. She handed him a piece of jerky and turned away to check the horses. Caleb chewed slowly, forcing the food down. His stomach protested, but he needed the strength. 10 minutes. He could do 10 minutes. By the time they were ready to ride, his fever was creeping back. He could feel it in the heat behind his eyes, the way his hands shook when he gripped the saddle horn. But he climbed onto Ash anyway, and when Elena asked if he was all right, he lied and said yes. They rode at a slow, steady pace, sticking to the cover of trees and rocks. The land here was rougher than before, all jagged ridges and dry gullies. Good for hiding, bad for speed. Caleb's side throbbed with every step Ash took, but he focused on the rhythm, letting it ground him. Elena rode ahead, her eyes constantly scanning. She'd changed since that first night in Thornton's barn. Harder, sharper, less willing to trust anything but her own instincts. Caleb didn't blame her. The world had a way of beating the softness out of people. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow pass that cut between two cliffs. Elena reined in, studying it. What do you think? She asked. Caleb looked up at the walls. Steep. No cover. If someone was waiting on the other side, they'd be sitting ducks. I don't like it. Me neither. But going around adds half a day, and we don't have half a day. Elena nodded. So we go through. Careful. Eyes open. They entered the pass side by side, their rifles ready. The walls rose up on either side, blocking out the sun, turning the air cool and dim. Caleb's pulse quickened. This was the kind of place where ambushes happened, where men died without seeing it coming. But the pass was empty. They made it through without incident and came out onto a high plateau. From here, Caleb could see for miles. To the north, mountains. To the west, more open country. And straight ahead, maybe 10 miles distant, a thin smudge of smoke. That's Helena, Elena said. Yeah. We're close. Not close enough. They kept riding, the plateau giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Caleb's vision started to blur at the edges, and he had to grip the saddle horn tighter to stay upright. Elena glanced back at him. How you holding up? Fine. You look like hell. Thanks. I'm serious, Caleb. If you pass out, I won't. But even as he said it, his body was proving him wrong. The fever was back in full force now, and his side felt like it was on fire. He could feel the stitches pulling, the wound weeping. He needed to stop, needed to rest. He didn't say any of that, just kept riding. They made camp as the last light died. Elena found a sheltered spot beneath an outcrop of rock and helped Caleb down from the saddle. He nearly collapsed, but she caught him and eased him to the ground. Let me see the wound, she said. He didn't argue. Elena unwrapped the bandage, and even in the dim light he could see her face go tight. It's infected, she said. Figured. This is bad, Caleb. I know. We need to clean it, properly. She stood and rummaged through the saddlebags, pulling out a small bottle. Whiskey. This is going to hurt. Just do it. Elena poured the whiskey over the wound. Pain exploded through him, white-hot and vicious. Caleb bit down on his belt to keep from screaming. When it finally subsided, he was shaking. Elena rewrapped the wound with fresh cloth, her hands quick and efficient. That should help. But you need real medicine, a doctor. Helena's got doctors. Helena's still 10 miles away. Then we ride at first light. Elena sat back, her face grim. You might not make it that far. I will. How can you be so sure? Because I promised you I'd get you there, and I don't break promises. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. You're the stubbornest man I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. She almost smiled. Then she pulled a blanket over him and stood. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. Caleb wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled him under before he could form the words. He dreamed of the war, of mud and blood, and the sound of men screaming. He dreamed of a battlefield where the dead didn't stay down, where they kept getting up and coming at him no matter how many times he shot them. He dreamed of Elena standing in the middle of it all, calling his name. He woke with a start, his heart hammering. The sky was still dark, but the stars were fading. Dawn was close. Elena was sitting a few feet away, the rifle across her lap, her eyes on the horizon. You were talking in your sleep, she said without looking at him. What'd I say? Nothing that made sense. Caleb sat up slowly, his side protesting. The fever had broken again, leaving him weak but clear-headed. What time is it? Early. Sun'll be up soon. Then we should move. Elena turned to him. You sure you can ride? Only one way to find out. She helped him to his feet, and this time he didn't sway. His legs held. That was progress. They packed up quickly and mounted the horses. The sky was turning pink by the time they started moving. The ride to Helena felt endless. Every mile stretched into two, every hill a mountain. But Caleb kept his eyes on the smoke in the distance and didn't let himself think about the pain. Elena rode beside him, silent and watchful. By mid-morning, they were close enough to see buildings. Helena wasn't much, a scattering of wooden structures, a main street, a few side roads. But it had a marshal's office. That was all that mattered. They rode into town slow, drawing stairs. Two ragged strangers on worn-out horses, one of them clearly injured. Caleb could feel the eyes on them, could hear the whispers starting. He ignored it all. The marshal's office was a squat building near the center of town. They dismounted and tied the horses. Caleb's legs nearly gave out, but he forced himself upright. Elena grabbed the satchel from her saddlebag, and they walked inside. The office was small and dim, with a desk, a few chairs, and a locked door leading to cells in the back. A man sat at the desk, middle-aged and barrel-chested, with a silver star pinned to his vest. He looked up as they entered. "Help you?" he asked. "We need to see the federal marshal," Elena said. The man leaned back in his chair. "That'd be me. Name's Harlan Boyd. What's this about?" Elena set the satchel on the desk. "Murder, fraud, attempted theft. Take your pick." Boyd's eyebrows went up. "That's so." "It is." Elena opened the satchel and pulled out the papers. "My name is Elena Rowe. My father, Jacob Rowe, was killed 2 weeks ago by a man named Marcus Thornton. He wants my land because there's a mineral vein running through it. These documents prove it." Boyd took the papers and started reading. His expression didn't change, but Caleb could see his eyes moving fast, taking it in. After a moment, he looked up. "You got any proof Thornton killed your father?" "No direct proof. But he tried to kill me, locked me in his barn, and told me to sign over the land or disappear. This man," she gestured at Caleb, "stopped him." Boyd's gaze shifted to Caleb. "That true?" "It is." "And you are?" "Caleb Hart. I own a ranch near Thornton's property." Boyd studied him, taking in the blood-stained bandage visible beneath Caleb's torn shirt. "You look like you've had a rough time of it. Thornton's men have been chasing us for 3 days. They shot me yesterday." "Did they now?" Boyd set the papers down. "This is a serious accusation, Miss Rowe. You understand that?" "I do." "And you're willing to testify?" "Yes." Boyd nodded slowly. "All right. I'll need to verify these documents. Check the claims, talk to some people, But if what you're saying is true, we'll bring Thornton in. When? Elena asked. Soon as I can arrange it. Could be a day, could be 2. He'll run, Caleb said. The moment he hears we made it to Helena, he'll disappear. Not if I move fast. Boyd stood. You two look like you could use a doctor and a meal. There's a boarding house 2 doors down. Get yourselves cleaned up. I'll send word when I'm ready to move. Elena hesitated. You'll really go after him? I gave you my word, didn't I? Words don't mean much where I come from. Boyd's expression hardened. They do where I come from. Now go. Let me do my job. Caleb and Elena left the office and walked to the boarding house. The owner, a thin woman with sharp eyes, took one look at them and showed them to a room upstairs. It had 2 beds, a wash basin, and a window overlooking the street. I'll send for the doctor, the woman said, then left. Elena set the satchel on one of the beds and turned to Caleb. You think he'll do it? Go after Thornton? I think he'll try. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Elena walked to the window and looked out. What if this doesn't work? What if Thornton gets away? Then we find him and finish it ourselves. She glanced back at him. You mean that? Yeah, I do. The doctor arrived an hour later, a young man with steady hands and a no-nonsense attitude. He examined Caleb's wound, cleaned it properly, and applied fresh bandages. You're lucky it didn't go deeper, the doctor said. Another inch, and you'd be dead. As it is, you need rest. Real rest. No riding, no fighting, nothing. How long? Caleb asked. A week. Maybe 2. I don't have 2 weeks. The doctor packed his supplies. Then you'll be dead in 3 days. Your choice. After he left, Elena sat on the edge of the other bed. You heard him. You need to rest. I will. After Thornton's arrested. Caleb, I'm not arguing about this. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't push. Instead, she stood and walked to the wash basin, splashing water on her face. When she turned back, her expression was softer. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For getting me here. For not giving up. Caleb shrugged, then winced as the motion pulled at his stitches. Told you I'd get you to Helena. You did, and you almost died doing it. Almost doesn't count. Elena shook her head, but there was something in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. You're a good man, Caleb Hart. I wouldn't go that far. I would. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Elena opened it to find Marshal Boyd standing in the hall. I've got news, he said. Can I come in? Elena stepped aside. Boyd entered and closed the door behind him. I sent a telegram to the assay office in Butte, he said. They confirmed your father's claim. The vein's real. High-grade silver, worth a fortune. Elena's breath caught. So it's true? It's true. And I found something else. Boyd pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. A deed transfer, dated 3 days after your father's death. It transfers ownership of your land to Marcus Thornton. That's forged, Elena said. I never signed anything. I know. The signature doesn't match the one on file, but Thornton tried to make it legal anyway. Boyd folded the paper. That's fraud. Combined with the attempted murder and the evidence of the mineral claim, I've got enough to bring him in. When? Caleb asked. Tomorrow morning. I'm riding out with a posse at first light. I'm coming with you, Elena said. No, you're not. This is law business. It's my land, my father. I have a right to be there. Boyd studied her. You know how to shoot? Yes. And you won't do anything stupid? Define stupid. Boyd almost smiled. Fair enough. You can come, but you follow my orders. Understood? Understood. Boyd turned to Caleb. What about you? I'll be there. The doctor said... I don't care what the doctor said. I'm going. Boyd sighed. You're both insane, but all right. Meet me at the office at dawn and bring your rifles. He left, and Elena closed the door behind him. She turned to Caleb, her face pale. This is it, she said. Tomorrow, we face him. Yeah. You scared? A little. You? Terrified. Caleb stood, moving carefully. That's normal. Is it? Yeah. Only fools aren't scared before a fight. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. What if something goes wrong? What if he kills someone? What if he kills you? He won't. You don't know that. No, but I'm betting on it anyway. Elena looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away quickly, trying to hide them. Caleb crossed the room and put a hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's all right. It's not all right. None of this is all right. Her voice broke. My father's dead. I've been running for my life, and now we're riding back into the place where it all started. You don't have to come. Boyd can handle it. No, I need to be there. I need to see his face when they arrest him. Caleb turned her around gently. Then we'll make sure you do. Elena wiped her eyes, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't usually... Don't apologize. You're allowed to be human. She laughed, a wet, shaky sound. I don't feel human. I feel like I've been running so long I forgot how to stop. Then we'll stop tomorrow, after it's done. Elena nodded and stepped back, pulling herself together. All right, let's get some rest. We'll need it. They spent the rest of the day in the room, eating the food the boarding house owner brought up and trying to prepare themselves for what was coming. Caleb cleaned his rifle and checked the ammunition. Elena did the same, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. When night fell, they lay in their separate beds, staring at the ceiling. Caleb? Elena's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah? If something happens to me tomorrow, it won't. But if it does, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything. Caleb turned his head to look at her. She was just a silhouette in the dim light from the window. Nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it. You can't promise that. Watch me. Elena was quiet for a long moment, then softly. Okay. They slept fitfully, both of them waking at every sound. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, they were already awake. They dressed in silence and gathered their weapons. Caleb's side ached, but the fever was gone and his head was clear. That would have to be enough. At the marshal's office, Boyd was waiting with 4 men. All of them were armed and grim-faced. Boyd looked at Caleb and Elena and nodded. Ready? He asked. Ready, Elena said. Then let's ride. They mounted up and left Helena as the sun broke over the horizon. The ride back to Thornton's ranch took most of the morning. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. When they finally reached the property, Boyd signaled for them to stop. He studied the layout, then turned to his men. 2 of you go around back, cover the exits. The rest of us go in the front. We do this clean. No shooting unless he starts it. The men nodded and split up. Caleb, Elena, and Boyd rode toward the main house. As they approached, the front door opened and Marcus Thornton stepped out. He looked the same as always, well-dressed, calm, confident. But when he saw Elena, his expression flickered. Marshal Boyd, Thornton said smoothly. What brings you out here? Boyd dismounted. Marcus Thornton, you're under arrest for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit theft. Thornton's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. You have proof? We do. Boyd gestured to Elena. Miss Rowe has evidence, documents, witnesses, enough to put you away for a long time. Thornton's gaze shifted to Elena. For a moment, something dark flickered in his eyes. Then he smiled. The Rowe girl. I heard you'd run off, caused quite a stir. He looked at Caleb. And you brought your pet ranch hand. How touching. Shut up, Elena said. Thornton's smile widened. Still got that fire, I see. Your father had it too, right up until the end. Elena's hand moved to her rifle, but Caleb grabbed her wrist. Don't. He killed my father, she hissed. I know, but not like this. Boyd stepped forward. Thornton, you can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. Thornton's hand drifted toward his belt. You really think you can take me? You and your little posse? I know I can. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes right before violence breaks loose. Then Thornton lunged. He pulled a pistol from his belt and aimed it straight at Elena. Caleb moved without thinking, throwing himself in front of her just as Thornton fired. The bullet hit Caleb in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through him. Elena screamed. Boyd and his men drew their weapons, shouting. Thornton tried to fire again, but Elena was faster. She raised her rifle and pulled the trigger. The shot caught Thornton in the chest. He staggered, his eyes wide with shock, then fell. The world went silent. Elena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. Boyd rushed to Thornton, checking for a pulse, then looked up and shook his head. He's dead. Elena dropped the rifle and ran to Caleb. He was on his back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Caleb! She knelt beside him. You idiot! Why did you do that? Promised I'd keep you safe, he managed. You're bleeding again. Yeah, I noticed. Boyd appeared beside them. How bad? Caleb looked down at his shoulder. The wound was clean, through and through, painful but not fatal. I'll live. Good, because I need your testimony. Boyd stood and called to his men. Get a wagon. We're taking him back to town. Elena stayed with Caleb, pressing her hand over the wound to slow the bleeding. Her face was pale, her eyes wet. You could have died, she said. But I didn't. You're the worst liar I've ever met. Caleb laughed, then winced. Yeah, I know. They loaded him into a wagon and started back to Helena. Elena rode beside him the whole way, her hand in his. Caleb drifted in and out, the pain pulling him under, but every time he surfaced, she was there. By the time they reached town, he was barely conscious. The doctor met them at the boarding house and carried him inside. Elena followed, refusing to leave. The doctor worked quickly, removing the bullet and stitching the wound. When he was done, he stepped back and wiped his hands. He's lucky, the doctor said. Again, but his luck's going to run out if he keeps this up. He won't, Elena said firmly. I'll make sure of it. The doctor left, and Elena sat beside the bed, watching Caleb sleep. Hours passed, the sun set, and still she stayed. When Caleb finally woke, it was dark outside. Elena was still there, slumped in a chair, her head resting on the edge of the bed. He reached out carefully and touched her hand. She woke with a start. Caleb? Hey, you're awake. Yeah. Elena sat up, rubbing her eyes. How do you feel? Like I got shot twice in 3 days? That's because you did. Fair point. She laughed, a tired, relieved sound. You scared me. I scared myself. Elena took his hand, squeezing it. Thank you for what you did. Don't thank me. You're the one who shot Thornton. He deserved it. Yeah, he did. They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands. Outside, the town was quiet. The world had stopped trying to kill them, at least for now. What happens next? Caleb asked. Boyd said the land's mine. Legally, he's filing the paperwork tomorrow. Elena looked at him. I'm going back to the ranch, going to rebuild. Good. You could come with me, if you wanted. Caleb studied her face. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. That's so. Yeah, I figure I owe you that much. Caleb smiled. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Why's that? Because I'm stubborn, and I don't ask twice. Caleb squeezed her hand. Then I guess I better say yes. Elena's face lit up, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly happy. Good, because I wasn't taking no for an answer anyway. They stayed like that until morning, two survivors holding on to something neither of them had expected to find. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, a future. The doctor made Caleb stay in bed for 5 days. 5 days of lying still while his body knitted itself back together. 5 days of Elena bringing him meals and changing his bandages. 5 days of watching the world through a single window while his mind itched to be anywhere else. On the 6th day, he got up. Elena found him standing by the window, dressed and testing his weight on both legs. She stopped in the doorway, a tray of food in her hands. What do you think you're doing? She asked. Standing. The doctor said, I know what he said, but I'm not spending another day in this bed. Caleb turned to face her. His shoulder was stiff and his side still ached, but he could move. That was enough. We've got work to do. Elena set the tray on the small table. Work can wait until you're healed. No, it can't. He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. Thornton's men are still out there. His operation doesn't just disappear because he's dead. Someone needs to make sure his holdings get sorted properly, and that means going through his ranch. Boyd's handling that. Boyd's one man with a territory the size of half of Montana. He needs help. Caleb reached for his coat. And you need to know what Thornton had on your land. Maps, surveys, anything that proves what he was after. Elena's expression tightened. You're not well enough. I'm well enough to ride. Barely. Then barely will have to do. She stared at him, frustration and worry warring in her eyes. Finally, she shook her head. You're impossible. So I've been told. Elena picked up the tray and shoved it toward him. Fine. But you eat first, and if you fall off your horse, I'm leaving you in the dirt. Deal. They ate together in silence, the kind that came from knowing each other well enough not to need words. When they finished, Elena gathered their things while Caleb moved through a series of careful stretches, testing his range of motion. His shoulder screamed in protest, but it held. Downstairs, Marshal Boyd was waiting with two of his men. He looked up when Caleb and Elena descended, his expression skeptical. You sure you're up for this? Boyd asked. I'm sure. Because if you slow us down, I won't. Boyd studied him for another moment, then nodded. All right, we ride out in 10 minutes. Miss Rowe, you coming? Try stopping me, Elena said. They mounted up in the street, drawing curious looks from townspeople. Word had spread about what happened at Thornton's ranch. The story had grown in the telling, the way stories always did. Some versions had Thornton pulling two guns. Others had him threatening to burn the whole territory down before he'd surrender. The truth was quieter, uglier, but no less final. The ride to Thornton's property took less time than Caleb remembered. Maybe because he wasn't bleeding. Maybe because the weight of being hunted had lifted. Either way, they made good time, reaching the ranch just past midday. The place looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow, less menacing. The main house still stood, 2 stories of timber and stolen ambition. The barn where Caleb had first found Elena loomed off to the side. Thornton's men were gone, scattered after their boss died, looking for work elsewhere or hiding from whatever consequences might follow. Boyd dismounted and gestured for his men to spread out. Check the outbuildings, look for anything that might tell us where his money went, who he was paying off, what deals he had running. The men moved off. Elena and Caleb followed Boyd into the main house. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Dust hung in the shafts of light coming through the windows. Thornton's office was on the first floor, a room dominated by a heavy oak desk and walls lined with ledgers. Boyd went straight for the desk, pulling open drawers and rifling through papers. Elena moved to the ledgers, running her fingers along the spines. What are we looking for? Anything that connects him to your father's death, Boyd said. Receipts, correspondence, records of payments to hired guns. Thornton was smart, but men like him always leave a trail. Caleb walked the perimeter of the room, his eyes scanning. There was a safe in the corner, door hanging open, empty. Either Thornton had cleaned it out before the confrontation, or someone had gotten to it after. On the wall above the desk hung a map of the territory, marked with pins and notations in Thornton's handwriting. Here, Caleb said, pointing. He was tracking properties, marking which ones he wanted, which ones he'd acquired. Elena came to stand beside him. Her father's ranch was circled in red, the word priority scrawled beside it. Seeing it there, reduced to a target on a dead man's map, made her jaw tighten. He wanted it for 2 years, she said quietly. My father told me Thornton made his first offer when my mother was still alive. Low offer, insulting. My father refused. Thornton kept coming back, raising the price each time, but it was never about the money. It was about what he knew was underneath, Caleb said. Yeah. Boyd pulled a ledger from the desk and flipped it open. Got something here. Payments made to someone named Cutter. Large amounts. Regular intervals. He looked up. That mean anything to you? Elena frowned. Cutter, I've heard that name, one of Thornton's men. Big guy, scar on his neck. He was always around when Thornton came to visit my father. Could be the one who pushed your father off that cliff, Boyd said. You think he's still around? Only one way to find out. Boyd closed the ledger and tucked it under his arm. I'll put word out. If Cutter's still in the territory, we'll find him. They spent the next 2 hours combing through the house. They found more ledgers, more records of shady deals and intimidation payments. Thornton had built his empire on fear and leverage, squeezing smaller ranchers until they sold or disappeared. Elena's father wasn't the first he'd targeted, just the one who'd refused to break. In a locked drawer in the bedroom, Elena found a stack of letters. She opened one, read a few lines, then her face went pale. "Caleb." He crossed to her. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. It was dated a month before her father's death, written in a careful hand. The contents were cold and transactional. Instructions for surveying the Rowe property, notes on the mineral vein, a recommendation to remove the obstacle if negotiations failed. The letter was signed by a man named Hargrove, a mining executive from back east. Thornton wasn't working alone, Elena said. He had backers, people with money who wanted that silver. Caleb read through the rest of the letters. They painted a clear picture. Hargrove had heard rumors about valuable ore in Montana. He'd sent agents to investigate. Thornton had been one of them. Or maybe he'd approached Hargrove himself, looking to profit from what he'd learned. Either way, the partnership was built on greed and blood. "This changes things," Boyd said when they showed him the letters. "If Hargrove's involved, this isn't just about local justice. It's fraud on a larger scale. Wire fraud, conspiracy, maybe even accessory to murder." "Can you go after him?" Elena asked. "I can send these to the federal authorities. They'll handle it from there." Boyd folded the letters carefully. "But it'll take time. Men like Hargrove have lawyers. They know how to stall. So he might get away with it." "He might. But at least we've got the proof. That's more than most people get." Elena nodded, but Caleb could see the frustration in her eyes. Justice was supposed to be clean, final. But the real world didn't work that way. The real world was messy and slow and full of people who knew how to work the system. They left the house and regrouped with Boyd's men. One of them had found a stash of weapons in the barn, rifles, pistols, enough ammunition to outfit a small army. Another had uncovered financial records showing Thornton owed money to half the businesses in Helena. The man had been living on borrowed time and borrowed credit, gambling everything on the silver beneath Elena's land. He was desperate, Boyd said. That makes sense now. He knew if he didn't get that mine operating soon, his whole operation would collapse. "And my father was the only thing standing in his way," Elena said. "Yeah." They burned the records they didn't need and loaded the rest into saddlebags. By the time they were done, the sun was sinking toward the horizon. Boyd's men mounted up, ready to head back to Helena. "You coming?" Boyd asked. Caleb looked at Elena. She was staring at the ranch, her expression distant. "No," Caleb said. "We'll stay here tonight, head back in the morning." Boyd raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's wise?" "Probably not, but we need to see her property, make sure Thornton didn't do any damage while she was gone." Boyd nodded slowly. "All right, but if you're not back in Helena by tomorrow night, I'm sending someone to check on you." "Fair enough?" Boyd and his men rode off, leaving Caleb and Elena standing in the yard. The silence settled around them, heavy and expectant. "You didn't have to stay," Elena said. "I know." "So why did you?" Caleb turned to her. "Because you need to see it. Your land. What your father was trying to protect. You need to stand on it and know that it's yours." Elena's throat worked. "I don't know if I can." "You can. I'll be with you." They saddled their horses and rode east toward the Rowe Ranch. The ride took an hour, the landscape familiar to Elena in a way that was both comforting and painful. When they finally crested the ridge and looked down into the valley where her family's property lay, she pulled her horse to a stop. The ranch looked abandoned. The house was dark, the barn doors hanging open. Weeds had started to reclaim the yard, but the land itself, the rolling hills, the stands of pine, the creek that cut through the southern pasture, all of it was untouched, wild and beautiful, and hers. Elena dismounted and walked forward slowly, as if she were afraid the ground might give way beneath her feet. Caleb followed, giving her space but staying close enough to catch her if she fell. She stopped at the edge of the property line, marked by a weathered fence post her father had set 20 years ago. She reached out and touched the wood, her fingers tracing the grain. "He built this," she said softly. "Every fence, every building. He wanted to leave me something solid, something that would last." "He did," Caleb said. "Thornton tried to take it. But he didn't. It's still here, still yours." Elena turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I miss him. I miss him so much it feels like I can't breathe." Caleb closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, sobbing, all the grief and fear and rage she'd been holding back finally breaking free. He held her tight, one hand in her hair, the other on her back, and let her cry. When the tears finally slowed, she pulled back, wiping her eyes roughly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not usually—" "I know, but you're allowed." Elena nodded and looked back at the ranch. "What do I do now? How do I rebuild this?" "One day at a time, same as anything else." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only plan that works." They walked the property together as the sun set, Elena pointing out landmarks and sharing memories. Here was where she'd learned to ride. There was the creek where she'd caught her first fish. That grove of trees was where her mother had liked to sit and read. Every piece of land held a story, and Elena told them all, her voice steady despite the pain underneath. By the time they reached the house, it was nearly dark. The front door was unlocked. No point locking doors when no one was around. Inside, everything was as Elena had left it. Dust covered the furniture, but nothing had been disturbed. Thornton's men had ransacked the office looking for the documents, but they'd left the rest alone. Elena lit a lamp and moved through the room slowly, touching things. A quilt her mother had made, a cup her father had used every morning. Small pieces of a life that felt impossibly far away. "I can't stay here tonight," she said finally. "Not yet." "That's all right. We can camp outside." "You don't mind?" "No." They made camp in the yard, building a small fire and cooking beans and coffee. The stars came out, bright and cold, and the night sounds of the prairie filled the air. Coyotes singing, wind in the grass, the crackle of the fire. Elena sat close to the flames, her arms wrapped around her knees. "What was your family like?" she asked. Caleb poked at the fire with a stick. "I had a brother, younger. We grew up on a farm in Ohio. Our parents died when we were kids. Fever took them both in the same winter. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He paused. "My brother and I tried to keep the farm running, but we were too young, lost it to debt. After that, we drifted, took work where we could find it. Then the war came." "Did he fight?" "Yeah, we both did. Different regiments." Caleb's voice went quiet. "He died at Shiloh. Took a bullet in the first hour of fighting. I didn't even know until 3 days later when someone from his company found me." Elena reached out and took his hand. "I'm sorry." "Me too." They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning down to embers. Finally, Elena spoke again. "What made you come to Montana?" "Needed to get away from the places that reminded me of him. Figured I'd start over somewhere no one knew me, somewhere I could forget." "Did it work?" "For a while. And then you heard me scream." "Yeah." Elena squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you did." "Me too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stayed like that until the fire died and the cold drove them to their bedrolls. They slept side by side under the stars, and for the first time in weeks, neither of them had nightmares. Morning came with frost on the ground and a sky so clear it hurt to look at. They ate a quick breakfast and rode back to Helena, arriving just before noon. Boyd was waiting at his office, and he looked up when they walked in. "Glad you made it back," he said. "I was starting to worry." "We're fine," Elena said. "What's the news?" Boyd gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. "Got a telegram from the federal marshal in Denver. They're opening an investigation into Hargrove. Could take months, maybe longer, but they're taking it seriously." "What about Cutter?" Caleb asked. "No sign of him yet, but I've got people looking." Boyd leaned back in his chair. "In the meantime, Miss Rowe, your land is officially yours. The deed's been filed, and there's no legal challenge. You're free to do whatever you want with it." Elena let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You did the hard part." Boyd stood and extended his hand. "You're a brave woman, Miss Rowe. Your father would be proud." Elena shook his hand, her eyes bright. "I hope so." They left the office and walked back to the boarding house. Elena was quiet, her mind clearly elsewhere. When they reached her room, she turned to Caleb. "I'm going back to the ranch tomorrow," she said. "Start cleaning up. Get it ready to live in again. You want help?" "I was hoping you'd offer." Caleb smiled. "Then I guess I'm coming with you." "What about your place?" "It'll keep. Right now you need the help more than I need to check fence lines." Elena looked at him, something soft and unguarded in her expression. Why are you doing this? Really? Caleb thought about that. He could have given her a dozen reasons, all of them true, but the real answer was simpler. Because I want to, he said. Elena stepped closer. Just because you want to? Yeah. She reached up and kissed him. It was tentative at first, testing, but when he didn't pull away, she deepened it. Caleb's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. When they finally broke apart, Elena's cheeks were flushed. Was that all right? Yeah, Caleb said, his voice rough. That was all right. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Good, because I've been wanting to do that for days. Why didn't you? Figured you'd think I was crazy, kissing a man I barely know. You saved my life twice. I think we're past barely knowing each other. Elena laughed, and the sound was bright and free. I suppose we are. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies for the trip back to the ranch. Tools, food, lumber for repairs. By evening, they had everything loaded onto a wagon Boyd had loaned them. They'd leave at first light. That night, Caleb lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. His shoulder ached and his side was sore, but none of that mattered. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the hollow ache of survival. He felt hope. The next morning, they set out before the sun was fully up. The wagon creaked and groaned over the rough road, but the horses were strong and the weather held. They reached the ranch by mid-afternoon. Elena stood in the yard, looking at the work ahead. The house needed cleaning, the barn needed repairs, the fences needed mending. It was overwhelming, but when Caleb came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, it felt possible. Where do we start? She asked. Wherever you want. Elena looked at him, then at the house. Let's start with the house. Make it livable. Everything else can wait. They worked together through the afternoon, sweeping out dust and cobwebs, airing out rooms, scrubbing floors. It was hard, physical work, and by the time the sun set, they were both exhausted. But the house was starting to feel like a home again. They made dinner over the fireplace. Simple fare, but it tasted better than anything Caleb had eaten in weeks. They ate at the kitchen table, the lamplight soft between them. Thank you, Elena said, for everything, for saving me, for staying, for helping me reclaim this. You don't need to keep thanking me. I know, but I want to. Caleb set down his fork. Elena, I need to tell you something. What? I'm not good at this. At staying. At building something. I've spent the last 10 years running from things, and I don't know how to stop. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time, remember? Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd survived everything the world had thrown at her and come out stronger. Who'd faced down killers and corruption and grief and refused to break. Who was offering him a chance at something he'd thought was lost forever. Yeah, he said, one day at a time. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for repairs, mending the barn roof, fixing broken fence posts, clearing brush. Afternoons were for the livestock Elena started bringing back, a few cattle, some chickens, a pair of horses. Evenings were for sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over land that was finally, truly hers. Boyd sent word that they'd found Cutter. He'd been arrested trying to cross into Canada and was being brought back to stand trial for Jacob Rowe's murder. The evidence was circumstantial, but combined with Thornton's ledgers and witness testimony, it would likely be enough. Elena took the news quietly. It wouldn't bring her father back. But it was something. A small measure of justice in a world that rarely offered it. The mine on her property remained untouched. Elena had no interest in digging it up. The silver could stay where it was, buried and forgotten. Her father had wanted to build a ranch, not a fortune, and she would honor that. One evening, as they sat on the porch with coffee, Elena looked at Caleb. Do you ever think about leaving, going back to your place? Sometimes. And then I remember I like it here better. Elena smiled. Good, because I'm not letting you go that easily. Caleb leaned back in his chair. You ever think about what comes next, after the ranch is fixed up? Sometimes. I figure we keep building, maybe expand the herd, plant some crops, see where it takes us. We? Yeah, we. Elena looked at him. Unless you have other plans. No, no other plans. She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. They sat like that as the stars came out. Two people who'd been broken by the world and were slowly putting themselves back together. It wasn't perfect. They argued about how to fix the barn. They disagreed on which cattle to buy. They had moments of doubt and frustration and fear that the good they'd found wouldn't last. But they kept going, one day at a time, building something that was theirs. And slowly, against all odds, it started to feel like home. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a cold that settled deep in your bones. The first snow fell in late October, dusting the hills white and turning the morning air sharp enough to sting. Caleb woke to find frost on the inside of the windows, and Elena already up, stoking the fire in the kitchen. "Sleep all right?" she asked without turning around. "Well enough." He pulled on his boots and joined her by the stove. "You?" "Same." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Elena still woke some nights gasping, trapped in dreams where her father was falling and she couldn't reach him. Caleb had his own demons, the faces of men he'd killed, the brother he'd lost, the years he'd spent drifting with no direction. But they didn't talk about it much. Some wounds ran too deep for words. Instead, they worked. The ranch demanded constant attention. Fence lines broke in the cold. Livestock needed feeding. The roof leaked in 3 places, and no matter how many times Caleb patched it, the water found new ways through. But slowly, inch by inch, the place started to come together. By mid-November, they'd rebuilt the barn door, replaced half the fence posts on the eastern pasture, and brought the herd up to 30 head of cattle. It wasn't much compared to the big operations, but it was a start. Elena kept meticulous records, tracking every expense, every sale, every decision. She ran the ranch the way her father had taught her, with care and stubborn determination. Caleb found himself falling into the rhythm of it. The early mornings, the hard work, the quiet evenings. It was a different kind of life than he'd known, and he wasn't sure he was built for it. But every time he thought about leaving, about saddling Ash and riding back to his own place, he looked at Elena and the thought died before it could take root. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Elena set down the ledger she'd been studying and looked at him. "We need to talk about something," she said. Caleb looked up from the harness he'd been mending. "What?" "Money. We're running low." "How low?" "Low enough that if we have a hard winter, we might not make it to spring." Caleb set the harness aside. "What do you want to do?" Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered land. "I've been thinking about the mine, the silver. I thought you wanted to leave it alone." "I did. I do. But I also need to keep this ranch running, and cattle prices are down. If we could extract even a small amount of ore, enough to get us through the winter." "No." Elena turned to him. "Why not?" "Because that mine is what got your father killed. You start digging it up, you're inviting the same trouble back." "Thornton's dead. Hargrove's being investigated. Who's left to cause trouble?" "There's always someone." Caleb stood and crossed to her. "The moment you start pulling silver out of the ground, word gets out. People start asking questions, looking for ways to profit. You think Thornton was the only greedy man in Montana?" Elena's jaw tightened. "So what, I just let it sit there? Let my father's discovery go to waste while I struggle to keep this place afloat? If that's what it takes to keep you alive, yes. That's not your decision to make." "No, it's not. But I'm asking you to think about it. Really think about it." Elena turned away, her hands clenched into fists. "I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about how hard my father worked to build something here. I'm thinking about how he found that vein and knew it could change everything. And I'm thinking about how he died before he could see it through. He died because someone wanted it more than he did. And I'm supposed to just let them win?" Caleb caught her arm, turning her to face him. "Your father didn't care about the silver. He cared about this land, about building a life here. If you dig up that mine, you're turning this place into exactly what Thornton wanted, a source of profit instead of a home." Elena's eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. "What if I need both? What if I need the money to keep the home?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, she was right. Money was running low and winter was going to be hard. But opening that mine felt like opening a door they'd never be able to close. "Give it until spring," he said finally. "If we're still struggling then, we'll talk about it again. But right now we've got enough to get by. Let's focus on that." Elena studied his face, then nodded slowly. "All right, until spring." She pulled away and walked back to the fire, sitting down with the ledger again. Caleb watched her for a moment, then returned to mending the harness. The conversation hung between them, unfinished and uneasy. December brought heavier snow and temperatures that dropped below zero. Caleb and Elena worked in shifts, one of them always tending the livestock, breaking ice on the water troughs, making sure the cattle didn't freeze. It was brutal, exhausting work, and more than once Caleb wondered if they'd make it through. But they did, one day at a time. Word came from Helena just before Christmas. Marshal Boyd sent a rider with a letter. Cutter had been tried and convicted of Jacob Rowe's murder. He'd been sentenced to hang. The execution was set for January. Elena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I don't know." She stared at the paper. "I thought I'd feel something, relief maybe, or satisfaction, but I just feel empty." "That's normal." "Is it?" "Yeah, justice doesn't always feel the way you think it will." Elena looked at him. "Did it feel that way for you? After the war?" Caleb thought about that. About the men he'd killed, the battles he'd fought, the years he'd spent trying to outrun what he'd done. No. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like survival. And now? Now it feels like I'm finally done running. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." They spent Christmas quietly, just the two of them. Elena made a stew from salt pork and vegetables, and Caleb surprised her with a gift, a new bridle he'd been working on in secret, tooled leather with her initials carved into it. She cried when she saw it, then kissed him and said it was the best gift she'd ever received. Caleb didn't have the words to tell her what she'd given him. A reason to stop drifting, a place to belong, a future that didn't look like the past. So he just held her and hoped she understood. January came with a cold snap that killed two of their cattle. Elena took it hard, blaming herself for not bringing them closer to the barn. Caleb tried to tell her it wasn't her fault, that sometimes animals died no matter what you did, but she wouldn't listen. She threw herself into the work with a ferocity that worried him, pushing herself until she was exhausted, then pushing harder. One night, Caleb found her in the barn, sitting in the straw beside a sick calf. She'd been there for hours, trying to warm the animal, trying to keep it alive. But the calf was fading, its breathing shallow and labored. Caleb knelt beside her. "Elena." "I can save it," she said. "I just need more time." "Elena, look at me." She turned and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The desperation. "You can't save everything," he said gently. "Sometimes things die and there's nothing you can do about it." "I can try." "You have tried, but this calf is dying and you sitting here freezing isn't going to change that." Elena's face crumpled and she buried it in her hands. "I'm so tired, Caleb. I'm so tired of losing things." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I know. But you haven't lost everything. You still have this ranch. You still have the cattle that are alive. You still have me. What if that's not enough? Then we'll figure it out. But you can't do that if you work yourself to death." The calf died an hour later. They buried it the next morning, the ground frozen so hard Caleb had to use a pickaxe to break through. Elena stood beside the grave, silent and hollow-eyed. Caleb wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the weight she was carrying, but he knew there were no words for this. Loss was loss. You carried it, or it carried you. That night, Elena came to his bed. She didn't say anything, just slipped under the blankets and pressed herself against him. Caleb held her, feeling the tremor in her body, the way she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. What if we don't make it? What if I lose the ranch? What if—" "We'll make it." He tightened his arms around her. "I don't know how, but we will." She was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "I love you." The words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Caleb's chest tightened. He'd never been good at this, at letting people in. But Elena had slipped past his defenses without even trying, and now here she was, offering him something he didn't think he deserved. "I love you too," he said. Elena lifted her head, her eyes searching his face. Then she kissed him, slow and deep, and for a while the cold and the fear and the weight of everything they were carrying didn't matter. February brought a thaw, and with it, hope. The snow melted, the ice broke, and the land started to wake up. Caleb and Elena worked to repair the damage winter had done, fixing fences, checking the herd, preparing for spring. The work was hard, but it felt different now, like they were building towards something instead of just surviving. One morning, a rider came up the road. Caleb was in the barn, and Elena was in the house. She came out when she heard the horse, wiping her hands on her apron. The rider was a young man, maybe 20, with a letter in his hand. "Miss Rowe?" "That's me." "Got a letter for you, from Denver." Elena took it, frowning. "Thank you." The rider tipped his hat and rode off. Elena opened the letter and read it, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. "Caleb!" she called. He came out of the barn, concern tightening his chest. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. "Hargrove's been arrested. The federal investigation found evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. He's going to trial." Caleb scanned the letter. It was from the federal marshal, detailing the charges and thanking Elena for her cooperation. At the bottom was a note. The government was seizing Hargrove's assets, including the contracts he'd signed with Thornton. Any claim he'd had to the Rowe property was void. "It's over," Elena said, her voice shaking. "It's really over." Caleb looked at her, saw the disbelief and relief warring in her eyes. "Yeah, it is." She laughed, a wild, breathless sound, and threw her arms around him. Caleb held her, feeling the tension drain out of her body. For the first time since he'd met her, she felt light. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "You did it? This was your fight?" "No. It was ours." She pulled back to look at him. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Sure you could have." "No, I couldn't." She cupped his face in her hands. "You saved my life, Caleb, more than once. And you stayed when you didn't have to. You built this with me. That matters." Caleb covered her hands with his. "Then I guess we're even, because you saved me too." That night, they celebrated with the last bottle of whiskey Elena's father had kept in the house. They sat on the porch, passing the bottle back and forth, watching the stars come out. The air was still cold, but spring was coming. You could feel it in the wind. "What do you want to do now?" Caleb asked. Elena took a sip of whiskey and handed it back. "I want to build this place into something my father would be proud of. I want to run cattle, maybe grow some crops. I want to make it a home." "Sounds like a good plan." "And I want you here, with me, for all of it." Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd been through hell and come out fighting, who'd lost everything and refused to stay down, who'd somehow decided he was worth keeping. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Promise?" "Promise." Elena smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I'm holding you to that." Spring came in full force by late March, turning the hills green and filling the air with the smell of new grass. Caleb and Elena threw themselves into the work, planting a small garden, expanding the herd, making repairs they'd put off through the winter. The ranch started to feel less like a battleground and more like a home. In April, they rode into Helena to buy supplies. The town was busy, full of people preparing for the season ahead. As they walked down the main street, Caleb noticed people nodding to Elena, tipping their hats. Word had spread about what she'd done, standing up to Thornton, bringing down Hargrove, reclaiming her father's land. She'd become something of a legend, though she didn't seem to notice. At the general store, they ran into Marshal Boyd. He shook their hands and asked how the ranch was doing. "Better," Elena said. "We made it through the winter." "Glad to hear it." Boyd's expression turned serious. "I wanted you to know, Cutter was hanged last month, died without saying much. But it's done." Elena nodded. "Thank you for telling me." Boyd tipped his hat and left. Caleb looked at Elena. "You all right?" "Yeah, I keep thinking about my father. How he never got to see any of this. The ranch surviving, Thornton and Hargrove getting what they deserved, me finally being free of it all." "He knows," Caleb said. "Wherever he is, he knows." Elena blinked back tears. "You think so?" "I know so." They finished their shopping and headed back to the ranch. On the ride home, Elena was quiet, lost in thought. When they finally reached the property, she pulled her horse to a stop and looked out over the land. "I want to get married," she said suddenly. Caleb turned to her, startled. "What?" "I want to get married." You and me. I want to make this official. Elena, I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months, but I don't care. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, not just a partnership, a real life. Caleb stared at her, his heart pounding. He'd never thought about marriage, never thought he was the kind of man who deserved it. But looking at Elena now, fierce and beautiful and stubborn as hell, he realized he wanted it, wanted her, wanted all of it. All right, he said. All right? Yeah, let's get married. Elena's face split into a grin, and she spurred her horse forward, laughing. Caleb followed, his own laughter echoing hers. They raced across the land, wild and free, and for the first time in his life, Caleb felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They were married in May in the small church in Helena. Marshal Boyd stood as witness, along with a handful of townspeople who'd become friends. Elena wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, and Caleb wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. When the preacher asked if Caleb would take Elena as his wife, he said yes without hesitation. And when Elena said yes in return, her voice was steady and sure. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, the sun setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. That night, they lay together in the bed they now shared, talking about the future, about expanding the herd, about building a bigger house, about the children they might have someday. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't heard me scream that night? Elena asked. Caleb thought about it. Sometimes, but I don't dwell on it. Why not? Because I like this version better. Elena smiled and kissed him. Me too. The years that followed were hard, but they were good. They expanded the ranch, built a new barn, added more cattle. There were setbacks, droughts, hard winters, sick animals. But they faced them together, and somehow that made all the difference. In the second year, Elena got pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter in the winter, a tiny, red-faced thing with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubbornness. They named her Grace, after Elena's mother. Caleb had never thought he'd be a father. Didn't think he had it in him. But the first time he held Grace, something shifted inside him. This tiny life, so fragile and perfect, was his to protect, his to raise. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to have something worth fighting for. 2 years later, they had a son. They named him Jacob, after Elena's father. The boy had his grandfather's quiet strength and his mother's fire. Watching him grow, Caleb saw pieces of the man Elena's father must have been, and it filled him with a fierce pride. The ranch thrived. They built a reputation for quality cattle, fair dealing, and honest work. People came from miles around to buy from them, and slowly, they became part of the fabric of the territory. No longer outsiders or survivors, just people building a life. Elena never opened the mine. The silver stayed where it was, buried and forgotten. She'd decided her father's real legacy wasn't what was under the ground. It was what he'd built on top of it. A home, a life, a future. Some nights, Caleb would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Elena would join him, Grace on her hip, Jacob running circles in the yard, and Caleb would think about how far they'd come. From that night in Thornton's barn to this, a family, a home, a life built from nothing but grit and refusal to quit. You ever regret it? Elena asked one evening. Regret what? Staying, giving up your own place to help me build this. Caleb looked at her, at the woman who'd changed everything. Not for a second. Good. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Because I'm not letting you go. I know. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the light fade. The world was still hard, still full of challenges and uncertainties, but they'd learned that the hard things were worth fighting for, that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about finding something worth living for. And they had. Years turned into decades. Grace grew into a strong, intelligent woman who ran the ranch with the same stubborn determination as her mother. Jacob became a skilled rancher and horseman, respected throughout the territory. They both married, had children of their own, and the ranch expanded to accommodate the growing family. Caleb and Elena grew old together. His hair went white, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of work. Elena's face lined with age, but her eyes never lost their fire. They'd walk the property together in the evenings, moving slower now, pointing out changes and memories. Here was where they'd rebuilt the barn after the fire of '85. There was the grove where Grace had learned to ride. That pasture was where Jacob had brought down his first deer. Every piece of land held a story, a life lived and built and fought for. One evening, when they were both in their 70s, they sat on the porch as they always did. The sun was setting, painting the hills in gold. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter bright and clear. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Elena said. "What?" "That night. When you kicked down Thornton's barn door, how different things would have been if you'd just kept riding." Caleb thought about that. About the man he'd been before, drifting, hollow, running from a past he couldn't escape. "I don't think I'd have made it much longer. Not the way I was living. And now? Now I've got more reasons to live than I can count." Elena took his hand, her fingers thin and weathered but still strong. "I'm glad you stopped running." "Me too." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, the sky turning from gold to purple to deep blue. The stars came out, one by one, and the children's laughter faded as they were called inside for dinner. "You think we did all right?" Elena asked. "Building this? Raising them?" Caleb looked at the ranch, the sturdy buildings, the healthy livestock, the land that had been passed down and would be passed down again. He looked at the house where their children and grandchildren lived and laughed and built their own futures. "Yeah," he said. "I think we did just fine." Elena smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, the way she'd done 1,000 times before. "Good, because I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I." They sat there as the darkness settled, two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. They'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to act despite it. That love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. That home wasn't just a place, it was the people you chose to build it with, and they'd built something that would last long after they were gone. When Caleb passed away in his sleep at the age of 76, Elena held his hand and whispered that she loved him. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tree they'd planted together 30 years earlier. The whole territory came to pay respects. Friends, neighbors, people whose lives had been touched by the quiet, stubborn man who'd chosen to stay when he could have run. Elena lived another 5 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to know the ranch was in good hands. When her time came, Grace and Jacob buried her beside Caleb, under that same tree. The headstones were simple, just their names and the years they'd lived. But the ranch they'd built, that was the real monument. It stood as proof that in the hardest places, the most broken people could find redemption. That courage and choice could rewrite destiny. That love, when it was real and hard-won, could build something stronger than fear or greed or death itself. Years later, when Grace's grandchildren asked about the people buried on the hill, she would tell them the story. About the night a stranger heard a scream and chose to act. About the woman who refused to let evil win. About 2 survivors who built a life from ashes and blood and stubborn hope. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, because every family needs a story to tell, a foundation to build on, a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a choice. You can run, or you can stay and fight for something worth keeping. Caleb and Elena had chosen to stay, and in doing so, they'd built a legacy that would outlast them all. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations, a testament to what 2 people can build when they refuse to give up, when they choose love over fear, when they decide that survival isn't enough, that living, really living, means putting down roots and fighting for the things that matter. It's a story of courage, of resilience, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they had to. And it's a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hear someone scream and decide it's your problem too. Because in the end, we're all connected, all responsible for each other. And the choices we make, to help or to walk away, to build or to destroy, to love or to harden our hearts, those choices echo forward, shaping the world long after we're gone. Caleb and Elena understood that. They lived it, and the world was better for it. Their story didn't end with triumph or tragedy. It ended the way all good lives do, with work done, love given, and a legacy left behind. A ranch that still stands, children and grandchildren who carry their names. A hill where two people rest together, having earned their peace. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows through that valley, you can almost hear it, the echo of a life well lived. The sound of two people who looked at a broken world and decided to fix their corner of it. That's all any of us can do, fix our corner, build something worth keeping, love fiercely, fight for what matters. And maybe, if we're lucky, leave the world a little better than we found it. Caleb and Elena did that. Against all odds, through all the pain and fear and loss, they did that. And their story, fictional though it may be, reminds us that we can too.